Okay, friends, today I'm so excited to bring you a powerhouse panel of women who live and breathe change every day. They are leaders, advisors, practitioners who've seen what works, what fails, and what really helps people move forward. So before we fully jump in, I'm just going to ask you guys to introduce yourselves. I'm going to start with Miss Quisenberry, who's on my top right, and then we'll go from there.
Well, the fun introduction is I am the non-biological twin of Rachel Bourne. We've worked together for a number of years, but otherwise, I am Rachel Quisenberry. I've had a career in leading transformation at the intersection of people, finance, and operations. And now, through my research in IO psychology, I am looking at ethical, sustainable mechanics for how we do systemic design for organizations.
Love that. Alicia, how about you?
Hi, I am Alicia Miller, and I lead strategy and strategic initiatives where we are aligning our technical talent, your AI, data scientists, and your product teams to deliver results for organizations. I have worked more than 15 years in the public sector, but I'm very well connected with my community and broader national and global organizations where I have helped advise and change globally and helped with my local communities in navigating particularly changes now on AI transformations. Happy to be here.
Thanks so much, Alicia. And Hiba, how about you?
Hi, everybody. I'm Hiba. So I primarily do change management in the world of strategy and process improvement. So how are we doing things today? How can we do them better? And kind of in that mainly IT and healthcare space. So it's very interesting from a capacity of how do our hospitals work and what can we do better to help our patients. So it's very cool. Happy to be here.
Awesome. I can't thank you guys enough for being here. I'm so excited to share what each of you has to say. I've had a chance to really get to know both all of you very well and the work that you're doing. So I'm really excited to just kind of start at the ground level. Change doesn't happen in slides or necessarily strategy or culture, really, in some regards, but it's happening within the people, and it can be really tough. And I think in the world today, our audience in particular, many of which are senior managers, directors at all different sizes of companies, but they are experiencing an incredible amount of change. When you think about the human side of change, I'd love to know just what stands out the most to you. What do people underestimate about the personal toll? I'd just love to kind of click on that first.
I think we forget that everybody is human and it is not a just do it because I said it process. It is you have to bring them along for the journey and help them better understand. That's why you call it the human side of change, because if we don't take into consideration the empathy aspect, the emotions aspect, and just that, we have a lot going on. There's more than just your project. So it's taking all of that into consideration and thinking of it as more of an ecosystem and a whole world versus just your little, not so little, but little change that they have to handle. So I think we need to remember
Mhm.
that always.
Such a good thing. Yes. Is there a particular practice that you use personally to encourage others through that?
Yeah, try to take a step back and put myself in their shoes. And they're in their world, and sometimes they forget that others exist as well. So taking a step back and reminding myself that that's where they might be. And if I didn't have the experiences I had, I might be there as well. And it's kind of like having that conversation with them of it's not just you, and that's okay, but how can we help people to involve you as well?
I think for people, one of the things that's important is how can you articulate for them what's in it for them and where do they belong inside of the change process? Because change is scary. I mean, I've said before,
Mhm.
people can digest a certain amount of change and it can outpace them if they don't understand what's in it for them. Sometimes what happens in change initiatives is that they think of it as a moment in time and they don't think about it from a sustainability perspective. And as a result, it becomes harder for people to begin to manage it. And so you have to think about how might you help your people develop that type of muscle memory so that they become more accustomed to change, right? Like the saying, practice makes perfect. It's not actually true, right? Practice makes habits. And I am a sports parent, right? So what we want is we want to help people develop the muscle memory of how to be engaged and involved in change. It's a better way to help people understand where they are in the process if we help them develop that muscle.
That's a really interesting point. So you're sort of talking about this, like, help them understand the why and then build those skills and the practice of, being in change. I was just at Unleash last week, Rachel, and they were using different words, but very similar. And it was kind of like some of the HR community was just hearing this. Oh, AI isn't just an IT implementation. It's a utility, right? It is an always on, always changing thing, and we have to treat it differently. It was one of the things that I was like, well, I'm glad they're figuring this out finally. But
I don't
really
think
good
people
point.
are resistant to change, Rachel. I think people fear becoming irrelevant. And there are some communities that feel like they will be more impacted than others, right? You and I have had recent discussions about functional areas that may have a higher impact from an AI perspective. And so they're trying to figure out what this is going to mean for them.
I fully agree with you, and I believe that. And I've sat there with teams where presenting kind of a new vision and a modernized way of doing things, and sometimes they will honestly, you see them agreeing, you see them wanting that. But the challenge for them is I built this legacy system. Like, I am the person who people go to for these processes, and it's built inside their their psychology, honestly, of
A
here's
security
yeah,
ethos. Yeah.
this is who I am, this is what I bring to the organization, and that fear of losing that status, that privilege, that sense of, "Here's what I'm contributing to the world," is really hard for some people to get over, and helping them find a role in that new future, finding that same purpose, but doing things differently really is that hurdle in moving from where we are today to where we need to go tomorrow, and it's working one-on-one with those individuals to help them find a place in the future.
I love that this has just like come up this organically out of it, because it's the purpose of the shift show, right? I also agree with you that people really do fear being irrelevant. And if we help them learn the new skills, like here's what's coming, then they can adapt more proactively. It feels less reactive. There's less fear, right? It's almost like the fundamental premise we're testing here.
And setting them up for that success is so important. I went from implementing a tool, a web-based tool for call center agents to use, where all their data and all of their troubleshooting was baked in. It was all technology now, but they were using binders. So we went from here to here, right? So it was how to
Wow.
provide them the right resources along with the what's in it for me so that they can gradually take the steps, because a lot of times leadership will just come in and present the highest form of change, and we had to kind of add steps so they didn't feel so alarmingly different, because they were literally using binders. It was very interesting. So that's like a piece of
And
it.
that's a massive change. So tell us like a little more about how you did that. How did you kind of keep that going and move into that more of the utility model Rachel is talking about?
Yeah. So once I discovered that they were they were that different in a world, it was
Mm.
going on site and sitting with them and actually like building relationships. I spent time with them. I drove to Delaware. I flew to Massachusetts. I went to call centers all over the world, actually. And it was tethering with them, listening to their calls, and then finding that relatable talking point of like, I understand that you did this to help the customer, but we can show you a faster way. And then all of your metrics adjust, right, for the good, because they're tracked on how fast did they handle the calls, was the customer satisfied, and other data points like that. So it was building that relationship and that trust, and then everything else was just kind of keeping in touch with them. Really, it's so simple, yet not nobody thinks of that, right? But I started with that, and then it was talking to them saying, how can I provide you the resources, and kind of involving them in the process and almost making them into change champions. So it was like the constant keeping in touch, creating resources for them, communicating with them regularly, listening into their calls so they felt like we knew where they were coming from. I like to call it like we sit in an ivory tower and tell people what to do. So how do we bring ourselves like down? And so those are a few of the things that we did to help.
Alicia, I want to double click a little bit on some of your experience in particular working in leading AI in complex organizations. How do you see like an AI driven change different from like the kind of change that Hiba's talking about?
Yeah, I love this question. And Rachel, one of the things that we've noticed is that AI has taken a transformation over time. And so we are now embracing a brand new paradigm. The modern AI that we're talking about today, that people are really embracing, is in the generative AI. And this is fundamentally different from the things that we've experienced in the past. And so I'm going to focus really on that kind of AI and change. And what we're talking about here is this shift towards, in the past, we've had these transformations. We've had things like internet. We've gone to smartphones. People have had to adapt and learn new things, which is helping us build this change muscle. But when we've started using technology, we've gotten accustomed to very deterministic systems. We walk in, we know what we want them to do. They've been tested and built in a way where they execute certain things in a very defined way. We go out and train people how to use things in this very defined way that gets the same result every time. Generative AI and language models changes this to the point where it is now a possibility. It is not something where we're coming out and saying very deterministically, here's how things are going to work. It is something that creates a new possibility that will generate responses that vary from one person to the next, and also may not be fully 100% accurate. You may not be able to guarantee that it's going to work in a very consistent way. That's a paradigm shift. When we launch and move this into organizations and preparing people to working with that kind of environment, we have to change the expectations. We have to help people understand that you are walking into an environment where suddenly it's opportunities. I am teaching you that there are some possibilities that you can test with. And my goal for you is to walk in with this and be able to, one, expect experimentation. It is to expect that things aren't going to be able to perfect. It's going to be to learn. People that love to create and explore, they are so excited about the possibilities. So for us in the change and the training realm, the first thing that we're doing is, one, trying to find people who like to create and explore. We're teaching them what the possibilities are. We're teaching them what the risks are and how we can work with these tools, which is different from how we've done things in the past.
Well, and with that uncertainty can come failure, right? I mean, you're
Absolutely.
asking for creativity and experimentation.
So two
That's
comments on that one, because this is one thing that has been really exciting for me, is because in a research and an analytics world, we have done this repeatedly. We're always testing things and evaluating outcomes, which is kind of new for some of the IT deterministic workflows of I collect requirements, I build the requirements, I deploy with those requirements. We're now actually bringing a lot of diverse skill sets and backgrounds together to design together, to develop together, but also to test what are the outcomes and measure the results for these. And we're measuring things using some of our traditional methods, but also some new ways itself. But that measurement is really important. I think the other thing that is critical here is for people to understand that as we are designing these systems, these aren't things that are going out right now that are perfect systems, just, acquire and build. You are building these sometimes in your environment. And to get that, you now have this scaling process, right? Where we are going out, teaching people what the capabilities are, asking them to explore with us. And then I think the real goal in large scale transformations is kind of in twofold. On one hand, when we launch some of these like efficiency tools out there, it's really showing people what the capabilities are, allowing those individuals to come up with tailored solutions, and then creating the environment where they can go and share with their peers. It's train the trainer in a very different way than we've experienced in the past. You're not, your sub trainers aren't training people exactly what they were taught. They're training people what they learned, what they've created to help scale some real learnings and augmented ROI on one end.
you're training like critical thinking.
Yes.
And
100%.
you have skill sets, which is very different than this is how the process is done, right?
Yeah.
Here's your outcome.
Yeah.
Process farming.
I think there's another side of this around because we're seeing in the environment right now where there's definite studies out there where people are showing the efficiency gains, right? One study showed that, these tools are getting 30% efficiency gains. Another one looking at P&G, very, randomized controlled trial study, 12 to 16% less time working on tools when collaborating with AI. There are some efficiency gains, but we're also seeing the flip side of this, which is companies are coming out and saying, we can look at the MIT report, 95% of Gen AI are failing. People are struggling to move from, pilots into production. The real thing that people need to understand is we are in an environment right now where we are seeing trailers. Like, this is not the feature film. This is trailers. This is still being built. It's still coming out. To get the ROI in companies, it's not just getting people to learn how to prompt in a chat GPT to get to summarization tools. That's not where the value add is. It's getting to the point of the things that Hibba was talking about, which is redesigning your processes. It's AI strategy. There's so much that's underneath that, but you have to understand what are your business challenges and problems? How does AI fit into those opportunity spaces? It's not an end, it's a means. How does it fit in? And then how do we align our systems to push AI into those problem spaces to innovate and solve? And fundamentally, when we look at this kind of AI, there's an infrastructure piece, there's governance, there's a lot of technology that is actually required to make things work and align it into those use cases. And so there is a people aspect, but there's absolutely a technology and infrastructure. And I have seen actual real life cases where the problem isn't necessarily the people aren't ready. It's that the technology and infrastructure that they need to get those results isn't given to them. We're still working out our governance in order to move things forward. It's a system. So building out your AI strategies and aligning this is also going to be another critical point of this to get results. Others, what are your experiences here?
It's interesting that you talk about, the percentage of failure. I wonder if you removed AI from that sentence, I think you would still see continuity around changes failing. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that people assume that implementation is where stop happens. And it's not, right? To your point, it's actually everything after that helps to drive adoption, right? You can have initial ability, but how are people then engaging consistently? How is it being reinforced? How is leadership helping in order to ensure adoption? I mean, there's just, to your point, the systemic build, the governance, the
Mhm.
design, all of these things are what go into making change, frankly, any change last. I think AI becomes a little bit harder right now because the tools are evolving so quickly. I
Right.
mean, my goodness. And I'm an AI advocate, right? Like, I actually think that it is a very good multiplier. It can be an accelerator. And quite frankly, I also think that it can be a very inclusive tool for people who maybe think in a different way than the traditional linear thinking. I think it is a very good translation tool. So I think it has a lot of potential in the way work will happen, both now and in the future. But helping people move past kind of this initial space, right, where Alicia is, where she's like, you know, we're falling forward, we're falling forward quickly. I
Mhm.
want you to kind of get used to understanding and getting used to this environment of falling forward. In the meantime, I can only imagine that she may also have leaders who say things like, well, that implementation is done, check. And of course, it's just not how change works.
I always find myself reminding leaders, like, you can't just launch it and run away. You have to stay here. You have to talk to people. You have to follow up with them. And you can't just be like, okay, bye. That's like it's a tough concept for people to grasp sometimes. So,
Reinforcement is so important. And one thing that I also come back with on like why is AI different also is the adoption piece also keeps changing. I'm going to talk about some of our engineering teams, people that write code. They are now being asked to use like AI assisted code development. And there's so many different tools that are out there. The models keep changing. They're finding new ways of doing this. We have moved from expectations of people saying, oh, I can use it to help get debug my code and make it just run. Now to the point of trying to get it to actually write it with varying different degrees of success. But here's the interesting thing. The capabilities change where sometimes they are finding that they will get used to a certain tool, work with it within 3 to 6 months, brand new capabilities that are out there. They'll test
Oh,
a complete
100%.
tool, find out this works better, they're switching. We're
I'm
talking
still
within
annoyed about
3
the
months.
model 4 to 5 change for ChatGPT in my own workflows. Alicia.
Yes, yes.
I think that sometimes makes it feel very square peg round hole because it's evolving so much. And Alicia, to your point of it being a trailer, it just feels square peg round hole. Like, why are we forcing it when it's just some places it's truly not necessary, and then it's evolving too fast for other spaces. So it's finding that balance depending on who the audience is and what you're using it for. I find to cause a little bit of a whiplash.
Yeah, but I think it's a bit like I have a general contractor that I have been married to for a number of years, and he would be so mad at me if I was just inarticulate about tools. But like to your point about square pegs and round holes, it's a little bit more like foam. So what happens is it's whatever the space is, and the foam builds to whatever the shape is. That's actually difficult for people who have really concrete thoughts, right? This is square, this is triangle, this is rectangle. Whereas, it's meant to be adaptive.
I can see that, but I think in the corporate world when they're just making you use AI for something that's just like you don't need it here, focus on where you need it, and that's watering down the value, and that's like causing that mentality of I don't need this, why are we forcing it? But I think to your point of the foam, it is when people want to use it and then they can't keep up with it or what have you. I think it's very applicable.
If I'm listening to this, I'm a manager, I'm sitting in an organization, and I'm hearing AI every 5 minutes. I'm probably a team lead. What's like the one thing they could take away for their own teams to either help them navigate the change better or drive adoption better? What's your one recommendation for the people listening?
I think it's finding the relatability and the what's in it for me of it all. If you don't find that connecting factor, it's just this isn't for me, I'm leaving, right? That's where you're going to end up.
I agree. I would not ever lead with the, "Oh gosh, this is so efficient, it could help me reduce FTEs or anything else." Don't do that, right? Like you're automatically going to help people just sit in their resistance. I would encourage people to find, just like Hiba says, how can this be a tool that is an accelerator for you?
I would probably add to that. Don't give them the sales pitch that's not going to land. It has to feel real and authentic. And one of the things that you can always rely on is that I think this change is fundamentally shifting what we're going to see on a lot of technologies. If we haven't figured out exactly how it's going to add value in our position today, what managers can communicate to their staff is we are setting you up for the future. We are going to give space for you to test this out, to try these new tools, to help us find where it adds value to our work processes. But in the process, we are setting you up to be successful for this change that's happening now, and it's going to keep going.
There's a lot of science out there right now. Maybe science is too broad of a word. There's certainly a lot of research that talks about how the workforce is going to change and that you're going to have roles that become obsoleted and roles that are going to be created. Um, but interestingly enough, we're not quite seeing what many companies assume is happening, right? You've got companies who are like, well, we're just going to reduce headcount. I think what is going to happen, like any other innovation, is that work will change and the talent that will have to adapt and what we will need from talent will change. So I'm not necessarily in the place where we're going to lose X million number of jobs and we're going to gain X number of jobs, right? I think there have been a couple companies now who have shown that in fact work changed and they still needed headcount because the efficiencies created actually a greater demand. So I think there's just a little bit more to come in this space when we think about, how this can be optimized.
I think that's such a valuable call out because right now I think a lot of people are focusing on I'm training AI to do my job, so how long do I have? And that is the conversation. You don't hear too much from people about what you just walked us through, Rachel, which I think is so important and it's such a great positive. And we're not focusing on that from what I see. But
Oh, well, I agree. And the rhetoric and the news and everything just kind of feeds into that. But I also don't hear CEOs or CHROs standing up and saying, you're not going to lose your job because of the AI. We're going to find better work for you to do. My count was about 100,000 jobs were lost in literally the last like 3 days.
yeah.
I mean,
Mm.
I don't know, y'all. I'm struggling with some of the optimism.
I am
Well,
too.
I don't know that
And
I
I
would
think
ever consider myself to be an optimist. Yes, jobs are being lost, but they're going to change, right? Right. Things will change as how work changes, right? We will need people to show up with new skills. We went from a line where everything on an automobile was made by hand, and then machines were introduced. And in fact, you did see jobs lost until they adapted. We had different type of work. I think you're seeing the same type of shift, I would say, in the industry, right? I think this is just that impactful, right? Just as industrialization was that impactful, I think that this is that impactful.
The digitalization is, yeah.
I agree, but I also think companies need to do better about having that long-term vision of they can't solve it all, but there could be some foresight of we don't need to cut 100,000 people. We can probably cut like 70,000 people and keep on and train. And that long term, like operationally, the costs are probably less to just keep them and train them and move them to something else. And I know one or two companies did that, but it was still considered pretty controversial just by the demographics. But I
Mm-hmm.
think there's for that foresight, which just isn't happening because they get excited with the cost savings. I don't know if that's too blunt, but
I'm going to put
No,
like a
it's
little
not too blunt.
I'm going to put a little bit of a contrary opinion on this. Yeah, there's absolutely going to be some jobs, if they're highly repetitive, that these can be automated out. We've already been moving in that trend. But I do think there is a bit of noise right now where people are. What's happening, I see a lot in companies, is that there are just budget realities and they are making strategic decisions to shift their investments and resources. And this is aligning with layoffs to the point where I think people are experiencing that these are AI fueled layoffs when I think some of them are actually shifts of strategic investment. And I think to counter some of that and create more of that security, people are talking about here are these new jobs. And I think that can create some new noise of people feeling like, oh, I need to prepare for these new job titles that are going to come out there. Like how many times in the past year did we hear like prompt engineer is going to be a role? Like that's not happening anymore. What is happening though, fundamentally, is that some new skills are being embedded in jobs. So people are going to keep jobs. The amount of skills, the amount of knowledge that you're going to need to execute properly is going to change. So two versions here. One, certain jobs are going to be lower demand. Other jobs, in order to maintain competitiveness, in order to do your job well, you are going to need to learn new skills and understand perspectives outside of potentially a very narrow execution that you've done in the past.
and I think there's always room to train and learn more. That's absolutely a valid point. But I just think from the company's perspective, like the companies that are laying off all these people should bake some of that into their processes because the numbers are so high and the optics of it all is like terrible, right? But we should be standing up and upskilling as well in on top of, the unfortunate necessary layoffs.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I do agree with you. There is just some strategic investment shifting, Alicia. I think that there's also just some general uncertainty in the economy, particularly in the American economy, right? Where they're just being safe. And I do think the pendulum will swing back at some point. I was talking to a friend of mine who has an executive search yesterday, and he was like, 6 months, Rachel. Just give it 6 months. They'll be hired all these people back.
Well, some of this is really not about AI, right? Some of this is just about, I think, to Alicia's point, and Hippa's points, you're making strategic changes, you're making savings, you're doing all of this. This is behavior that happens in organizations, and that's kind of where the period goes. And there's also the systemic reward that organizations receive when they do this, when they reduce their headcounts, when they do that kind of thing. Their stock tends to be better and they're regarded better on the street, right? They're existing inside of a different type of system. And whether AI was the disruptor or whether it was about financial management or anything else, those things were still going to happen. But the coupling and the timing is something that is creating more noise.
Yeah. I want to shift a little bit because part of also the audience that's HR practitioners. Surprise, surprise, right? So I want to talk a little bit about change playbooks and tools that they can use. I'm going to start with you, Hiba, and pick on you a little bit with your pro side background. But like, tell me about the change management playbooks that kind of exist out there. We know what lands in theory doesn't always land in practice. What frameworks really matter when you're the most in the trenches?
I think it's the simpler, the better is the framework. And it doesn't have to be AdCar. Just because I come from ProSci doesn't mean I'm like, everyone use AdCar. But some flavor of AdCar is really all you need. It's kind of like the playbook of validating what's changing, driving that awareness, partnering with people so they understand and they want to be part of that change, and then driving that knowledge, ability. And then to Rachel, I think this is your favorite thing, Rachel. It's the reinforcement aspect of it. Like, it is making sure everybody stays around, right? So I think if you keep it that simple, I think it's easier to digest. I think what I've encountered is everybody wants to add their own flair. And that's where things get a little overcomplicated and a little bit harder to follow. So if we keep it really simple, it is just that much easier in HR, because HR is a very complicated world to begin with. And we're just making it harder on ourselves by doing any playbook that's more complicated than that.
Just in case someone who's listening doesn't know, AdCar is awareness, desire, knowledge,
and reinforcement.
Ability, reinforcement. Thank you. I mean, it's a very reasonable framework. I mean, I think it's worked really well for driving change for me in the past.
There's other companies, there's other methodologies, there's other playbooks out there. They are all some flavor of this. So that's why I'm anchoring to it. But I think it's just that simple piece of it is important.
Yeah. I actually quite like AdCar, right? I think the keep it simple space is really good. There are several different methodologies. If you've had other consultancies come in, like McKinsey's, which is by the far what I think is maybe one of the most complex ones that you can do. There's Cotter. I think for me, it's about complexity, time, and resources. So if you're going to choose a playbook, I think you need to ask some questions about how complex is the change? How much time do we have to do the change? And what kind of resources do we have to do this change? Because then it helps you make the decision about go, no go, or not right now, right? And then I think it also helps you make the decision about which model you would like to use. I think the simpler, the better. The more you add complexity, the harder it is. And if your organization doesn't have practitioners who are familiar, who are essentially kind of cherry picking from the different spaces. I'm looking at Hiba's face because I just want to see her reaction with that. It gets a little messy, right? It gets hard to execute because you're trying to help all of these things go together. And so wherever you can keep it simpler, the better it is.
Yeah, I think that piecemeal of someone comes in and has 9 different methodologies put into Frankenstein, I guess is what you could call it. That one is, I've gotten into a lot of interesting conversations of like, why are we so, I get it. That was really well said, Rachel.
I like that you mentioned complexity. And I think for me, that's been a critical thing in deciding how to move forward. which is there are some things which are fairly defined. And I think ADKAR works very well in building your playbook for that. Then there's other things, particularly in organizational things, or when we talked about at the beginning, where sometimes people are not aligning these use cases or like these tools and technologies to the use cases that add value. And in those cases, this is a little bit more complex and why I like, STAR or other models that start with strategy. What are your goals? The thing that I think ADKAR misses for me is that it doesn't start with saying, what is the goal? How do we determine what the use cases are? How do we make sure our systems alignment are actually putting the right resources in place to move the needle in this direction? And so if you have to figure out where to invest your resources or work in an organizational change, I do think some other models can help maybe start the conversations in a slightly better
There
direction.
is like the 4 Ps, what's the purpose, the project, and the people, and then you would do like your impact assessment so that you have your use cases mapped out by impacted users and you can scale them. So there are like I just focused on the playbook part, but I agree that it should all be cared for and it sometimes is skipped. People get excited and they just skip that whole what are we trying to do and why are we doing it and who are we
What
doing it
Right to
to?
the middle.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it is one of the hottest topics right now. I mean, everybody's just like, no one's clear on what's the problem you're trying to solve, and they're just implementing AI everywhere all the time.
I just had to bring the whole team back this morning actually because I was a piece of the work and then I found out the entire like it was standing up an office and nobody stood up the actual office and I was just working on the change for like the piece of it so I was like can we reschedule this meeting and go back and talk about it because I don't know what it is. So now I get
Oh,
to start
feels so
over.
consistent. Feels so consistent.
It's glad to know we're not
I
alone.
don't think it's intent. I just think it's excitement. But if time allowed, I would map it out. I would understand the inefficiencies. I would understand the contingencies and all the interrelated things.
All your
I
root
just think
cause.
that all the root cause, right? Just business moves faster. So I think we have to we have to utilize tools that help us make intelligent decisions, which just to be full circle, right? One of the reasons that I think AI is a great accelerator is that it can be helpful in thinking in that way when we may not be able to think about all of the contingencies. So more to come for sure. It's just that, if you got somebody who isn't a practitioner, asking them to use something that's a real complex process is maybe not setting them or their organization up for success.
Let me ask you guys a kind of a tough question now. What's a change fail that you've experienced, and what did you learn from it?
I think I'll have one if so there was a project where it had all the flair and the fanfare behind it of they wanted to stand up a new tool that everybody would use and it would just solve everybody's problems. So in the same vein of AI, but it wasn't AI. And it I don't think anyone really vetted it, but it was just it landed on our plate of, we really want to use it. Let's get this going. Oh no, there's no time for conversation. Just get into it. So I did like what I could in the time I had and nobody adopted it. It kind of just hung out in the ether and we were spending so much money on it. And it was similar to another tool that already existed. So we had done a proper impact assessment, which I did on my own, but and nobody wanted to see it. But we had a tool, it existed, it was very similar. But then when different teams and different leaders want to do things and add their own flavor, you kind of get caught up in that. But I love this tool, so we're going to use this. And somebody's already using
Mm.
a 75% similar tool. We're paying for more licensing. We're paying to upskill people to use it and like so many other things in between, right? So eventually we just transitioned to the tool that was already there because somebody got wind of the work and was like, why are we doubling up? And it was just,
Yeah.
we could have gotten there a lot faster if we weren't just like skipping so many steps.
I think actually that's a super common failure mode that's even
Yeah.
happening right now. I mean, literally, I've had probably like 3 conversations in the last month where
Right?
that's happened. Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We've lived it,
The
right? Like I think we've lived it.
yeah.
hmm
Solving one problem with this one little app or whatever, and it's drives a ton of work, and Poor adoption.
Yeah. I'm dating myself, but I like to call it Tinker Toys,
Tinker toys.
right?
Yes.
Because we fit all of these things into these little sections, and because everybody has something that they really like. That's such a good example.
Yeah.
I'm glad I got there.
So if I kind of bring this also now down to the individual level for the audience, we've talked about skills a fair amount and making people future ready. What's the one skill that you feel like people really need to thrive through this constant change? What would it be?
Big picture thinking, long term.
Interesting. And say more about that, Hibbett. Is that like being kind of focused on what's in it for me at the longer term? Is that strategic thinking, big picture?
I think it's a little bit of both. So if you think
Mm.
down the line just a little bit, it doesn't have to be years, but if you just think 6 months, right? And what am I going through right now? And how will it impact and better or even make things worse, right? Over the next few months. If you don't think that big picture, you're only going to be in your little silo and you're going to be doing change in your little world. And there might be other people that are impacted. There might be other things that already exist that could resolve the issue. It applies to many different things of like, if we're making a change, how does it impact our world versus just our little silo and other people too.
Oh, it's hard to
Mhm.
get out of that like view for some people too. Like this
Yeah.
is all about me and my tiny world here,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
I feel like continuous learning is the top of mind for me because we are in an environment now where we have so much change. It's so quick, but we know that we're going to have to keep learning. And I think part of the resilience is getting used to learning new things, getting comfortable with learning new things, and preparing ourselves that whatever we learn today may be unlearned tomorrow.
Practice makes habits. And so I think that curiosity, resiliency, those are things that have to be practiced. And I think they are skills. But in order to kind of be able to work through how rapid this change is going to happen, I think that resiliency is critical, and I think curiosity is critical. And I also would offer, I think from a very, very personal level, an ability to have some grace with yourself. I think that sometimes we're just very hard on ourselves. The expectation that we can absorb it all, we can do it all, we can do all of that, which, we're just not made that way. Maybe some people really are. I'm not made that way. So having some grace with recognizing that maybe it's a little hard to absorb right now. Maybe I need to figure out what the digestible pieces are in order to figure out how I'm able to move forward in that space is maybe more productive than being hard on yourself because I think that that makes the situation harder.
We are often the hardest on ourselves. We say things to ourselves that we would never say to another human.
I think taking into consideration the human side of change, it's also do the same for others. But if we don't do it for ourselves, we're never going to do it for other people.
Okay, quick fire round. What is the biggest myth about change?
Change stops at implementation.
Yes, good one. We knew Rachel would say that though.
Change is not linear.
Mm,
Oh, great.
that's a good one. What is the most surprising insight that you've learned about how people adapt?
I have a surprising one, which is change resilience for some people can show up as change avoidance.
Oh, interesting. Say more.
There are some environments where change happens so much, leadership happens so much that every 6 months can feel like a hype cycle when you're going through new leadership. So, in those environments, the way that people carry forward is to say largely, I am going to wait this out. I am not going to stress out about this brand new thing that I'm hearing. I'm going to wait it out. Some things are going to go away, some things are going to stay, but I'm going to wait until we get to that point where it seems like maybe this is going to stay and then I will jump on board which as leaders is something that we need to recognize, because when you're trying to motivate people to change now, they may act like they're very excited. They may act like they're completely on board and they're adopting, but behind the scenes, they are slow walking everything you were asking them to do.
That is a super interesting insight, Alicia. I'll just wait it out until you go away and person comes, Rachel.
Which gives like an interesting false sense of hope to the people implementing the change, because they're like, yeah, everybody wants it. And like, it's such a good point, Alicia.
Mhm. What is the one thing you wish every professional sitting in the middle of change knew right now?
That it's not just your change.
I would say listen more.
Is there anything else that you guys, I didn't ask you, that you feel like I need to ask you, and a message that you need to get out there?
Change practitioners are your partners in crime. You're
Not the bad guys?
I feel like I sound very negative, but that's what it is.
No, I don't think you sound negative. But, and you come from the consulting side of change too, Hiba. I mean, a lot of times there's a fear of the outsiders, where people have had, negative experiences with some of the big, particularly big four, swoop in, drive change, and leave.
I get messages from friends like, oh, this consulting firm's coming in. Should I be worried? Like, that's the aura that all consulting people give. So.
Right.
If I tagged on to what to Hiba, I would say don't assume that someone has to be a subject matter expert within your space in order to help you facilitate your change. Change capabilities exist in several different spaces, and it's actually a pretty translatable skill, especially if they're able to sit down with you and ask the questions and help you begin to really define what you're trying to solve. So I would be a little more open to including some partners, whether it is a consultant, someone from a different function, because many people train in order to be able to enable change.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Very cross
I
transferable.
love that you said that, because I wrote a Substack blog post about how the change practitioner does not need to be the SME. So while it's not exactly what, it's like the same thread of, if they know too much, they're not helping. And it's just, I love that you said that, because it's so true.
We'll put that link in the show notes too, and then people can read about it.
I might have to write a part 2 to Rachel's point of why you should bring in other people too. I like that.
Oh yeah, so much diversity of thought and experience. Well, this has been a super powerful conversation. Hiba, Alicia, Rachel, thank you very much for sharing your wisdom with the audience. They are living and dreaming the change. They are living and drinking from this fire hose of change, just with you and with us. And then to everybody listening, remember, this change is going to be constant, but it doesn't have to be chaotic. So you do have that ability to reset and reframe, have that continual learning, build the skills that will carry you through. So I hope that you guys will also, whether it's on this podcast or not, I really want to know what change you're navigating now, and share that. Feel free to reach out to our experts here as well. And we thank everybody for listening.